All right, we are moving on to our next panel discussion, and this one is quite an interesting one. It's enhancing the informal transport sector, motorbike taxis and informal buses and minibuses. How can there be control and discipline in the informal sector? Now, I know as a motorist, it is one of the big concerns when it comes to being a private driver and having to have informal transport on the roads. And Warren Ondanje is the VP Business Development or VP for Business Development at the Association for Electric Mobility and Development in Africa. Warren, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Good, thank you. And you were coming to us from Kenya. How's it doing? How are you doing in Kenya?
Yeah, Carol could not have put it better. The weather, we're just surviving for now, but we hope it will be beautiful.
Great. Quick one. As VP of Business Development at the Association for Electric Mobility and Development in Africa, what exactly is your role?
Right. So at the moment, for the association, my role entails reaching out to organizations invested in the electric mobility market in Africa. For now, we're starting in the East Africa region, and we're reaching out to these companies to try and inform them that there is a united voice that we can form as electric mobility companies, mainly because the regulatory framework is not very clear. So there needs to be a way that these companies can come together to start forming these self-regulating initiatives in a way to create a progressive market that will now usher in the entry of electric vehicles.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Warren. Before you get your panel started, if you do have any questions throughout the panel, please feel free to add them to the comment section, and then Warren or myself will get those questions to the panelists after the conversation. So, Warren, the floor is yours.
That's okay. So thank you very much. It's actually an interesting conversation. We had a chat with Fulu, with Henry, with Alex yesterday, and I think this is just a spillover of what we had started yesterday. So Fulu, Alex, I think we're expecting a couple more people, but welcome for now. It's good to see you all. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Warren.
Thank you, Warren.
Great. Even before we wait as we're waiting for the rest of the participants, I just wanted to throw it out there, carrying on from the conversations around how can we enhance informal transport sector in the African context. I just wanted to maybe as you're introducing yourselves, let us know what role do you see the informal transport sector play into the African economy today. I'll let Fulu go first, and then Alex, you can also introduce yourself.
All right. Thanks, Warren, again, and nice meeting you again, Alex. My name is Fulufhleo Mandane. I work for ABSA Bank. I look after the automotive space of the bank in terms of financing of vehicles, and in my portfolio includes taxi finance for ABSA in particular. So I think the one role, maybe if I could just introduce the topic, is around that we should not underplay the importance of the informal sector in the African continent, in terms of, in particular, the fact that we know that there's issues of unemployment that exist within the continent, and the informal taxi or the informal transport system that exists within the African continent is largely run by entrepreneurs who are obviously trying to fend for their families and obviously trying to alleviate some level of poverty within their communities. And the people that they employ actually end up being the ones that get empowered, and the ripple effect that takes place within that space in terms of what ends up happening within that kind of environment. For example, if you look at who they employ, if you look at the industry that exists within that platforms, i.e. you get people that repair the vehicles, you get people that wash the vehicles, you've got queue marshals, you even got people that sell food within the respective taxi ranks that exist. And let's not forget the consumption of petrol on the roads, diesel, whether it's petrol or diesel. And let's also not forget the consumption of tires and the support into the other corporate areas within the value chain, including those actual purchases of those vehicles, which plays a very important role within our economy. So that informal sector, for me, is a very important sector within the African continent. And up until we get into a state where we are economically as strong as the first world countries, I think we need that industry, and we need to see how we can support it and make sure that as we're working towards formalization, or as we're working towards development of technologies and integrated transport systems, we don't work against that industry, but instead we work together with the industry to ensure that we grow it to a certain extent, and we allow it to also modernize as it grows. And let them, those people that are within that industry, play a role in the development of the integrated transport system in Africa. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Alex, yeah, you may introduce yourself, and also let us know how are you seeing the contribution of in the informal sector in Africa's economy.
Okay, my name is Alex Mchilwa. I work for Opibus Limited. Opibus Limited, we deal with the drivetrain system. Our technology enables us to convert any ICE vehicle with an ICE internal combustion engine to fully electric drive for reliable and sustainable mobility transport. So for the informal sector, just like the other day in Kenya, our president was bringing together the border people together so that they can form a united circle. You see, these people, they're the ones who, they have a lot of cash regulating going through them every day. And since now like the last time the president was talking to them, they say in a month they collect like 4 billion. So these people need to be empowered on how the money that they generate, what kind of say do they have, and how can they be assisted? So with the income that they're generating right now, and with the formation of the circles, we'll be able to streamline these people, create a decent transport in them, whereby everybody who wants to earn something, everybody who wants to do something knows that there's a channel that can be used to bring them back or to bring them on board and provide transport. And the other thing I'm looking at is that when they are in these circles, it is easier for incoming people, incoming entrepreneurs who want to introduce new technology in the transport system. It will be easy for them. It will be easy for us, like Opibus, to reach them. In that, with the now that we are working with the electric motorbikes, we, instead of going to the individual, we will go to these circles that they're formed, and it will be easier for us to talk to the circles, and the circles will have an arrangement with the money that they collect for financing these people to have this new technology in use, and also for training, and also for maintenance, and everything will flow up in good place. Thank you.
Yeah, interesting about the role that two-wheelers also play in the whole informal transport sector. Henry, welcome. I know you're also joining us here from Nairobi. I hope the weather is okay on your side and your part of town.
Yeah, a little chilly.
Yeah, it's common here. But yeah, so what are you seeing as you're introducing yourself? How is the informal transport sector, what is its role in the African economy, probably now in the Kenyan economy? How are you seeing it play out?
Yeah, I think the first thing, I hope you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think the first thing we need to remember is that the informal transport sector came in to fill a void or a gap that was left by formal transport operators who either were unable or didn't want to participate in those sectors. So they're actually performing a valuable service to society. But nevertheless, they're also being affected by challenges with efficiency. They're also suffering problems in traffic congestion. Their fuel consumptions are high and so on. So they're also losing money with the traffic congestion. So involving them into an integrated transit system, where they're also working together with BRT, and perhaps some of them should be involved in the transition to BRT. Yeah, they'll benefit from the efficiencies. So they shouldn't be looked at as the enemy here. They can participate. But definitely I see that the business model needs to change from charging fares per customer carried, which forces them to behave recklessly as they race for more customers, and perhaps shift that to a more formal system where they're paid per kilometer and keeping to a schedule. So that would work for like the matatu sector, the paratransit sector. The motorcycle taxis may be a bit different, but they can be integrated too as well, providing them with facilities to drop off passengers at key stations for the larger transit units like BRT. Yeah, there's a lot of potential for engagement and also for everyone to enjoy the efficiencies of smarter mobility.
Yeah. So bringing the aspect of an integrated system would be a good solution, and this is what's some of the outcomes that we'll come to as we are furthering on in the discussion. But even to just to start off the conversations about painting the picture of how the informal sector, transport sector looks like, and the value that it's providing to the economy. Back to you, Fulu. This would be around understanding how how are the current situation, let's say the new pandemic, which has set us back a couple of steps, with the whole requirements of social distancing, how are we seeing that effect, especially hit on the informal sector? Are they also adhering similarly to the social distancing regulations? Is it a tough balance now, cost versus productivity and the final revenues? Yeah.
Okay, thank you again, Warren. I think the most important thing that we've picked up over the past, since April, since the first lockdown took place, is we obviously saw a situation where public transport system, especially the informal one, was not fully allowed to be operational within the system, obviously due to the restrictions that were put in place. The few that were allowed to actually be conducting some activities were only allowed to be carrying the essential services workers. So, which is not a big pool of people that were working during that period of time. So the impact was rather very negative, especially for those that currently have got finance obligations for the vehicles that they own, where they still need to pay for their debt that currently exists within the financial institutions. But also, if you actually think about the holistic economic situation within the country, was it has a ripple effect, right? So you sort of find that where the taxi ranks used to be quite busy, does not operate anymore. So which means all the people that are actually benefiting from the value chain also gets impacted. And I think that's the one picture that we sort of forgot about as we were trying to deal with the financial obligations of the taxi industry. But with that said, you sort of have to look at this into different folds, right? So we had the individuals that operate within the local environment, moving people to work on a daily basis, and you've got the long distance system that works between the provinces, and as well as the cross-border transport systems, where if you actually think about it, the cross-border was cut off completely from operating due to the blockage, whereas with the inter-provincial system, you had to have a permit for you to be able to go into the different provinces, whilst the locals had some level of activities. So as financial institution, we had to look at ways in which we can help obviously with the situation where we allowed for payment relief within that space, where those with financial obligations were allowed to have a payment sort of holiday for about 3 months up until things get better. But we also realized that as things started getting better when we moved to the different levels of lockdown, that even if they were to go back into operation, they wouldn't go back fully. So there'll still be some challenges because they were required to only carry about 70% of the people within the vehicles, and long distance was still not allowed to be traveling at that time. So we had to now go into a phase 2 of payment relief, where we sort of looked at how do we further help those people that are operational. Instead of maybe allowing them to not pay completely, we can then put different options in place where you've got a 50%, 65%, 75%, up until 100% over, again, a 3-month period, which we did put in place. And I think the good thing about what Alex mentioned around the formalization of associations, that's where it sort of helped most of the South African taxi industry, because the major association was the one that approached the financial institutions and said, how can you help our people? And then we then had to get a solution based on what they've proposed, and we actually agreed with how they actually came up, or they were looking at solving the problem for the rest of the members. And we felt that it was a win-win situation where we can also participate because it is a crucial part of our economic system. So we had to actually support that payment holiday plan phase 2. So now we're sort of getting back to normalization of the situation, which is much better actually. And we're starting to see more and more vehicles on the road. They are practicing some precautions when it comes to the COVID regulations, like all passengers must have their mask on. Some taxis have got the plastic glass in between the seats and the passengers, and they do regular cleansing of the taxi ranks from time to time, just to make sure that it's clean and it's conducive for all passengers. So there is some good plans in place, which is owned by the taxi industry as well as the corporate industry within the country.
Mm-hmm. And that's interesting. I wonder how the situation is turning out, maybe for the two-wheelers, the transport offered by these motorbikes. And so this would be probably something that Alex would give us a bit more detail around. How is the financing situation? How is the financial take-up? Especially now that you're introducing a new concept of electric motorbikes. Is that easy for maybe end users to understand? Because this is a technology that could potentially make a difference for the informal sector. I'm just not sure about how the information is being relayed to these people and how the reception is like for these operators.
Okay. With the introduction of the electric motorbikes in the Kenyan market, we are actually in talks with the major circles that are operating around the country, because we realized if we start engaging individuals in this stage, it will be the cost will be a bit too much, and then for them with the current situation with the COVID thing that came in, many people will not be able to buy them to buy in cash or acquire them at the moment. So we decided to talk to the circles, and right now we are doing we have 150 bikes out there in Homa Bay, doing a pilot project on how they are going to work, because it's an off-grid in an off-grid place. We also introduced the solar charging system. So these bikes also come with 2 swappable batteries, and the overall intention here is to have them to have more money in the operators' pockets, because the money they spend on buying fuel, the money they spend on maintaining these bikes, all these are going to with the introduction of the new motorbikes, we are going to have up to 80% savings, because we understand with the research we did in Kenya, an individual will buy a motorbike and give it to an operator, and they will put some standards. You say all I want at the end of the day is around 500 shillings or 600 shillings. So you see, this operator is under so much pressure to achieve. Also, at the same time, fuel the motorbike, maintain the motorbike, and also give the target that he has been set up to. So we are coming in to bridge that gap. In that, with the electric motorbike, the only thing that we'll be doing is just a few maintenance here and there, but for fuel and for the general service, that one is already taken care of with our team. And we are also doing this. We are also training people out there on how to do minor services on these motorbikes in case they are in the morning, there are no charging system, the charging is not working so well. Maybe we try to start the bike in the morning and it was not working. We also have this, we call them bush mechanics. We're also trying to bring back, to scale down the technology down to the village, so that this thing will work. And after that, we are thinking of rolling it out to the entire country, maybe sometimes in early next year, so that everybody can have a feel of the new technology in town.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just wonder what's the take-up for, the information, how empowered these end users are about electric vehicles, and maybe if it's easy for them to see, okay, this technology works, let me switch. Was that something that was?
Yeah, you see, they say information travels like a fire, like fire in a dry bush. So once everything works well in the pilot project that we are doing in Homa Bay. I know this information is going to flow through other circles, because we understand this organization, they do talk to each other. They do talk to each other, because even if you realize there's a certain model of motorbikes that is selling more, have so many units out there than another brand. So with this information, once this circle gets to know, in a month's time, they'll be able to see, okay, we tried this, and this is what we achieved. These are the savings compared to what we have done before. That information is going to flow. And we're also engaging several other stakeholders in the market to see that, hey, this information is related to to other people. We're also working with the Ministry of Industrialization to have this also known to them. We're working with NTSA. We're working with the Ministry of Transport. All this information we want to be available to the end user.
Great. So I think that empowerment of the information has its own place, but it has to be supported by some legal structures. So regulations here would be quite necessary, especially in trying to formalize. I don't know if we are formalizing or just transitioning the informal sector. And Henry, I don't know what your thoughts would be around how are we transitioning? Well, how is the current regulatory space like for the informal sector? Is it punitive? Are there possible opportunities for improvement, either to transition this sector, or should it really disappear? So maybe get your thought around how the regulatory space is like for the informal sector.
Yeah, I think in many countries the governments are willing to support the sector because there are also a big section of the voting public. So it's a sector that the government wouldn't be too drastic on, but the opportunities are there for better improvements on policies and so on. And governments are willing, if good ideas are brought that can include incentives rather than punitive measures. The opportunities are there, yeah, definitely. Like with the example with the electric mobility, the government, Kenya, in the last budget, reduced the excise duty on electric vehicles by 10%. So it's an indication of the willingness of government to listen to what it is that is attractive to the informal sector. Another key thing about the informal transport sector is that it's very sensitive on margins. The profit margins are very small, and anything that can increase the margins would definitely be taken up by them. So electric mobility is key because the running costs are much lower. There's lower maintenance cost. The electricity cost per kilometer is much less than with fuel. They just need more examples of this, more awareness, as Alex has detailed. And this will be able to grow in the informal transport sector. But definitely, policymakers need to be brought on board. They need to be shown what is happening on the ground, so that they're also aware when they're making their regulations and knowing which policy.
Probably Henry has dropped
in what is happening, so that they can also assist with the push.
Great.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like the thoughts that a lot can be done by this government. And maybe, gentlemen, just to take you a step back, it would be interesting to try and highlight, even before we move into the solutions, what are the sorts of problems that are ailing our informal transport sector today? We have these minibuses that are trying to really operate, maximize their margins through, whichever means. And the same thing goes with the two-wheelers. What would be the main challenges that you see currently in the informal sector? So I think we'll begin with Henry and then go around to Fulu and then Alex.
I think with the informal sector, it's the only way they know how. So the way they operate, they don't know any better alternative. And it's up to us to show them these are the opportunities that are there. If you formalize, I think a lot has been done with getting them to join SACCOs and formalizing their business structures. I think that has been a very big step and can be taken forward. So like with e-mobility, it can be introduced to SACCOs. They can try out one or two electric motorcycles and compare it with what they have. And I think that would help speed up adoption of some of these new smart mobility options for them. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll add on to what Henry said just now, and I'll just try and approach it in terms of my area of expertise, which is more the finance side, because I think a lot has been explained today around some of the challenges that we're picking up in the industry. So from the finance perspective, what we're seeing is the fact of the matter is that this industry is a very lucrative industry when it's done right. And those operators that are doing very well within the industries are making good income, actually, if you actually think about it. And considering the guys that are within our SADC area, the guys that are doing cross-border traveling and stuff like that, that's a very lucrative route as well in terms of who they take over there and how much money they make going back and in on each trip. But the big challenge that we're picking up is around the financial literacy as to how to manage their own finances and how to grow that informal business that they've got into a reputable formal business that's operating that can last generations to come, and how to make sure that they provide some level of security for their families when they pass on. So we sort of pick up that lack of financial literacy that exists within the system, where you find that they fall victims into different scams that exist within the financial markets, where they also go for cheap options of purchasing certain vehicles, which are probably not even good for the routes that they're traveling in. And also how to maintain their vehicles. Some you find that they struggle with that because they just go to wherever can fix their cars. So if I was to look at that from the financial perspective, it all affects, at the end of the day, their credit worthiness in terms of an individual in the long term. Because if they struggle with that one vehicle, even if they had intentions of expanding their fleet into 20 vehicles or 30, it's going to become very difficult to actually get cheap finance going forward. And they're going to have to rely to whatever finance options is there, which might not be the cheapest option. So I think formalization of their operation becomes very key as individuals within the respective organizations. But at the end of the day, I actually think that there are those that do very well that you find within the industry, and there are those that are not doing too well. And there's an extreme gap between the two. And if you can get that right, and you can have more people operating in a form of a business format, and you can actually start seeing more businesses being registered, because they'll understand that the value of owning a PTY limited, for example, instead of just running it as a sole prop. You'll start seeing that they'll see a value out of building trust for their families and starting to form partnership with different business entities that are much more formal. Because at the end of the day, those that do well, you find that they start getting to further contracts with corporate South Africa, for example, doing staff transportation for companies. You find that they start doing major transporting activities for mining companies. You start seeing that they get into more bigger buses as well as trucking businesses as well. And some of them end up getting into their own petrol station ownerships and stuff like that. And that's when the industry is doing very well, right? But there are times where it's not doing that well, and the majority of the people probably be sitting in the area where it's not doing well. And because of the financial literacy and probably the basics understanding or the fundamental understanding of how to run the business. And I think if we're going to take the industry seriously, that's one of the areas that we need to start looking at. How can we empower these individuals to actually start seeing broader than just making a quick ends meet, and start looking at how do I build this business to become a reputable business going forward.
So I'm picking up financial empowerment as one of the key hindrances if people are not well informed about the existing product, even selection of the vehicles that they use. And yesterday, there was an interesting point that you would raise around routes being profitable, but probably it's because of the poor selection of vehicles that people are not able to meet the revenues or the projections that they had declared with the banks. Could you maybe talk to us a bit about that? Because maybe someone would think it's the wrong business, but it's probably because they didn't go there empowered with the right tools, the right vehicles, and the right infrastructure to manage it.
Yeah, I'll be quick on this because I don't think we've got much time. So the most important thing was around to say, in most cases, downtime when it comes to the functionality of the vehicles is critical, especially to those that are servicing a debt on the vehicle. You want that vehicles to be running fully at all times and to be continuous making an income. You need to sweat the asset basically. And there are certain vehicles that we've learned in the past that has caused many operators to get into a lot of financial problems because the vehicle will break more often than it is on the road. So when you find those kind of things, you'll find that the route might be making money, but because the vehicle is not on the road most of the time, they can't actually fulfill their debt. And as time goes on, I think the industry sort of course correct themselves, and they become very resistant to certain vehicles that come into the market, and which is not probably the best thing that you would have wanted, because even when there's a new form of vehicles, or whether it's new form of technology coming into the vehicles, the electric vehicles, they get very wary of actually getting and committing to those vehicles because of what they've learned. So they tend to stick to one brand and to stick to one type of vehicle because they feel that it's much more reliable and they make more money out of it. And as a financial institution, we also see it in our performance, where you start seeing that certain brands actually do much better versus certain brand. Then you actually realize that there is some message in that data information that we get to say if the vehicles are actually quite good, plus the customer, plus the route, that's where you get some good key to success within the industry.
Great. Yeah, so those are interesting points, and trying to highlight about the possible areas for where we can make improvements, especially in the informal sector. And this I'll pass on to Henry and Alex. Where are the biggest changes, or where are the biggest opportunities for us to improve the informal sector today?
Okay, I think the biggest change, the places we need to improve on is the introduction of the cashless system, the cashless payment system for this in the informal sector. You find that when an investor sends the car out there, and the mode of payment is on cash, the amount he gets and the amount that has been the amount that has been collected that day at most of the time doesn't match. But now with the introduction of the cashless system, where all monies are paid to a certain platform, it will improve the relationship between the person, the investor, and the people who have been employed to run this, to operate these vehicles. In that it will minimize corruption. It will increase. It will also give the true picture of the person who has put his vehicle out there, his motorcycle out there. It will give the true picture, and in return, even for the salaries and for the amount, the wages paid, it will improve, because you see, with the cash payments, somebody will always want to work fast. Let me first get this and give the boss this, and see that where if we regularize, if we try and bring sanity in the payment, in the mode of payment, then this sector, everybody will be happy and everything will move on smoothly.
Great, thanks. Probably before we move on, I see that there's a question that has come in, and it's been directed to Fulu. So what are the key data points that you need to finance maybe electric two-wheelers, and what are the missing pieces needed in this ecosystem?
That's a very interesting question, actually. I think in terms of two-wheelers in our market in particular, it's not a big form of business that we see. So it will not fall within the asset-based finance when it comes to financing, but it will probably fall within the unsecured financing, where it's market in particular, where it's largely based on the affordability of the individual rather than the article itself. But if we're to redirect the same question for EV on normal vehicles, in most cases when it comes to vehicles that are being used for business use in particular, we obviously look at the profitability of the business that the the individual will be operating in. For example, if it's a taxi or public transport system, we look at the route in which they'll be operating in. We look at the profitability of that route. We'll also look at some level of credit worthiness of that individual to see what's the credit health like. And then we then make a decision out of that. So because it is, at the end of the day, business, we do base it on future income earnings rather than what the customer actually afford within that space. But if we were to have the same question for EVs, for two-wheelers, and the people are using it like in South Africa, where it's been used mainly for transportation of groceries and medicines and all these other things since the COVID-19 pandemic has started, we'll probably just, individual can buy those vehicles using their own personal financing or personal loans, where it's more based on the personal affordability and personal creditworthiness within the space. But it's something that's worth engaging further on because it's not a big market within our space, and it will be something that's worth investigating further on.
Yeah, I think even as the technology matures, then it would provide, the experience would then make it a bit more easier for financial institutions to look into this. Right. Great. We had another question, but okay, great. Here we go. Are there trade-offs between positive and negative externalities caused by informal transport while regulating them? I think this one maybe you can direct it to Henry.
Yeah, there are definitely trade-offs. Remember, the informal transport sector is there to fill a void or a gap that is not filled by the formal transport sector. So the vehicles are there when you want them. You can board them. There are issues with them getting loaded and so on. The formal transport sector, it goes with a timetable, but is a way of merging the two definitely, and you can get synergies from the two systems. But one thing the formal transport sector may have to do that the informal transport sector does very well is to gauge what the public need is and provide that need. Yeah. For example, in Nairobi, we have matatus. They will stop anywhere, but they will stop where there's a demand for people and where they can pick their passengers. While formal transport sector will have their bus stops, but located at very inconvenient places where people have to walk long distances to catch a bus and so on. So, there are many small issues that can be integrated, definitely, from both sides. Yeah.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for this session. Maybe I'll hand it over to you, maybe for just a quick word in closing.
In closing on my side, I'll just say that the informal transport, public transport system is an important system into the ecosystem. So we do need to look at it, and we need to look at how we can integrate it into whatever transport forms that we're trying to develop, because it has a potential of impacting the economy either positively or negatively, depending on how it's dealt with. And as us as a corporate, we've got a role to play. The government has got a role to play, as well as the general communities have got a big role to play. Thank you.
All right, well, back to you in studio. This has been an interesting session.
All right, thank you so much, gents. That was a very informative conversation. Fulufhleo, before you run, I have one question. What are the banks doing to support the purchasing of e-vehicles? Are they doing some sort of an incentive, whether it be in the business space or in the consumer space?
Yeah, I'll speak from ABSA side. We've always had some green finance within our space where we would incentivize the individual that's purchasing the vehicle based on its the impact on the environment. Obviously, based on those emissions that have been put within the guidelines by the government, and so we will give back incentives for those individuals that buy the vehicles. So that will include the EV vehicles as well. So that's how the role that we've been playing for quite some time now. And I think when it comes to electric vehicles, it's just going to get worse because now you're now speaking about 100% vehicle that has got zero emission. So we will continue driving that message across. So because we're dealing with the customer directly, you always try to influence the behavior of the customer so that they can be encouraged to go and purchase the EV vehicle instead of a high fuel emission vehicle within the space. So that will apply the same to companies that are doing fleet. You'll get a better pricing on a vehicle that has got a lower emission versus the one that is high. So your rate will be lower when you actually look at buying the vehicle. So those kind of things have always been some of the innovation that we put in place to encourage consumers to actually buy those vehicles.
It's very good to hear that. And gentlemen, thank you so much for the chat. It was really informative. I know you are going to be around in some of the exhibition areas as well as the networking areas. So if you want to speak to any of the gentlemen, then make sure that you find them in one of those areas.